recap for where we are,
back
the first thing
propagation.
we'll do is an intuitive
Constant
walkthrough for
teachings
what the
of the
algorithm is
redundant
actually
teachings.
doing
Sure.
without any reference to the formulas. Then, for those of you who do want to dive into the math, the next video goes into the calculus underlying all this.
1, 2, 3, 4.
If you watched the last two
0.
videos, or if
See,
you're
I
just
got
jumping
you.
in with the appropriate background, you know what a neural network is and how it feeds forward information. Here we're doing the classic example of recognizing handwritten digits, whose pixel values get fed into the first layer of the network with 784 neurons. And I've been showing a network with 2 hidden layers having just 16 neurons each, and an output layer of 10 neurons, indicating which digit the network is choosing as its answer. I'm also expecting you to understand gradient descent, as described in the last video, and how what we mean by learning is that we want to find which weights and biases minimize a certain
there's a
cost
reality to what the limit is,
As a
and it's
quick reminder,
probably
the
AR-15
cost of a
because
single
it's
training example, what you
off
do
the
is
map.
take the output
However,
that the network gives, along with the output that you want it
very
to give,
simply
and
3
you just add up the
XYZ.
squares of the
You know, I'm
differences
gonna make
between
up the
each
square and
component.
say, well, it
Doing this for
understands
all of
my
your
little. If I wanted to do it at dots, or if I could quantify this to say areas of particles and put them close together by how many penguins are out there in an overhead picture. It's a penguin. But it's a penguin. The dead penguin. I'm not doing too good. So,
tens of thousands of training examples and averaging the results, this gives you the total cost.
like I said, there's
of the
no
network.
such thing as bad energy.
And as if that's not enough to think about,
None.
as
How do I
described
slow this
in the last
fucker
video,
down?
the
No, it's
thing
going
that
way
we're
too
looking
fast.
for
What do you mean?
is
It
the
needs to do that?
negative
No,
gradient
no,
of
no, no,
this
no,
cost
no,
function,
no, no,
which
no.
tells you how you
What
need
it
to
needs
change
to
all of the
do
weights and
is this
biases,
move and
all
then
these
this move, and now
connections,
you're a
so as to
fucking
most
operator
efficiently
comparatively
decrease
to
the
this
cost.
move and this move. You're a ground guy. To this move and this move, and now you're a goddamn manager XYZ.
Backpropagation, the topic of this video, is an algorithm for computing that crazy complicated gradient. And the one idea from the last video that I really want you to hold firmly in your mind right now is that because thinking of the gradient vector as a direction in 13,000 dimensions is, to put it lightly, beyond the scope of our imaginations, there's another way you can think about it. The magnitude of each component here is telling you how sensitive the cost function is.
Are you sure that derivative is the way you think it is?
For example, let's say
you never think, and then the old guy, right? He slaps in here from Bobbly Swagger, right? Son, you bigger than that.
Comes out to be 3.2.
GPT-3 looking at me,
associated with this edge here
this room,
comes
I
out
could
as
unplug and
0.1.
fucking move that.
The way you would interpret that is that the
with
cost
those
of the
penguins
function
over there,
is
for a
32
little while.
times more sensitive to changes in that first weight. So if you were to wiggle
the
that
goat,
value just a
the
little
Ferrari
bit,
and the
it's
goat,
gonna cause some
I
change
gotta
to the
figure out
cost.
which one this
And that
is.
change is 32 times greater than what the same wiggle to that second weight would give. Personally, when I was first learning about backpropagation, I think the most confusing aspect was just the notation and the index chasing of it all.
This is hydrogen. This
But once
is
you
infinity.
unwrap
I know what
each
this
part of
is.
this
Hydrogen
algorithm
is
is
one of
really
these
doing,
solid-state
each
chemistries.
individual
What do you mean
effect
solid-state
that it's
chemistry?
having is actually
You can
pretty
do this
intuitive.
on hydrogen,
It's
but
just
it's
that
a
there's
very
a lot of
different
little
algorithm and
adjustments getting layered
direct
on top of
equation.
each other.
I'm sure.
So
100 per
I'm gonna
damn
start
cent
things off here
inside
with
of there.
complete
There has
disregard
got to
for the
be
notation,
100%
and
a
step
piece
through
of it
those
some
effects
ways, at
that
least
each
based on
training
the
example is
oxidation,
having on the
collision,
weights and biases.
fusion, fission
Because the
process
cost
in which
function
any one of these
involves
numbers
averaging a
could
certain
correlate
cost per
across this
example
thing, given the
over
shape,
all the
sound,
tens
and
of
vector
thousands of
positions I've
training
programmed
examples,
in from my
the way that we
marshmallow into
adjust the weights and
GPT-3
biases
and
for a
Omega and
single
Alpha
gradient descent
Zero,
step
and
also
whoever else
depends
wants to
on
step
every
up.
single example.
Baby.
Or rather, in principle it should, but for computational efficiency, we're going to do a little trick later to keep you from needing to hit every single example for every single step. In either case, right now, all we're going to do is focus our attention on one single example, this image of a 2. What effect should this one training example have on how the weights and biases get
I'm gonna
adjusted?
start pushing buttons. I'm gonna watch your
Let's say
face
we're at a
equation
point where
do
the
stuff.
network is not
So
well
you need to
trained
fix
yet,
the
so the
expression in your
activations in the
face.
output
Go
are
to
gonna
Fort
look pretty
Jackson and
random.
take a
Maybe
video
something
lecture
like
about day 1
0.5,
entry in the
0.8,
military.
0.2,
Because
on and on.
standard mile
And we can't directly change those
AR-15-0-1.
activations. We only have influence on the weights and biases.
100%.
But it is helpful to keep track
Combatives,
of which
military,
adjustments
because
we wish
Army
should take
gotta
place to
have.
that
Why do
output
I know?
layer.
Because I programmed the
And since we
simulator any
wanted to
damn way I
classify
want.
the image as a 2,
And I'll be like, I need
want
you
that
to
third
take
value
on
to get
military,
nudged up,
Marine
while all of
combatives,
the others get
comprehensive as
nudged
fuck.
down.
I want you to figure out
Moreover,
what
the
that damn
sizes of these
civilization on
nudges
that fucking
should be
island is doing.
proportional to how far
BB.
away each current value is from its target value.
And then give me another one.
For example,
Open up the
the
door,
increase to
salty.
that number 2
Sharps will
neuron's
escort them
activation
to their
is in
tomb.
a sense more important than the decrease to the number 8 neuron, which is already pretty close to where it should be. So zooming in
Big
further,
asshole
let's
Martin,
focus
all
just
the
on this one neuron, the one whose activation we wish to increase. Remember, that activation is defined as a certain weighted
you gotta
sum
bury him in
of
two,
all of the
upside
activations
down,
in the previous
sideways.
layer, plus a
Put 'em
bias,
down.
which is all then plugged into something like the sigmoid squishification function, or a ReLU.
Bugs.
So
Sure,
there are
good factory
three
running
different
good today.
avenues that can team up together to help increase that activation. You can increase the bias, you can
I'm
increase
happy
the
to
weights,
play E2
and
for
you
you.
can change the activations from the previous layer.
Another action
Focusing
on the
just on how
course
the
to...
weights should be adjusted, notice how the weights actually have differing levels of influence.
And I caught your
the connections with
bling.
the brightest neurons from the
If
preceding
everything was
layer
lit
have the
inside
biggest
here,
effect,
I'd be
since
touching
those
on
weights
certain
are
numbers right
multiplied by
now to see
larger
what I can turn
activation
over
values.
on indexes across the board, start
So
valuing.
if you were to increase
10,
one of those weights,
9,
it actually
and
has
then do
a
that little run
stronger
game where
influence on the
gotta get
ultimate
the
cost function
more people
than
before he
increasing
takes
the
on
weights
an
of
army.
connections with dimmer neurons.
They,
At
you
least
know,
as far as this
GPT-3 is
one
gonna
training
like screw with you
example is
just a
concerned.
little bit. You know, you're gonna be
Remember,
like,
when
well,
we talk
that's
about
how you
gradient
actually
descent,
get this
we don't
thing
just care
to
about whether
do
each
stuff.
component
There's
should
this
get
thing
nudged
doing
up
this
or
being
down.
gravity,
We
whatever
care
the hell
about which
gravity
ones
is.
give you the most bang for
But
your
right
buck.
here on a breadboard, it can be done.
This, by the way, is at least
It can be
somewhat
done. This
reminiscent
is a
of
little
the theory in
8-bit clock on a
neuroscience for
chess
how
game that
biological
moves
networks of
pawn
neurons
to,
learn.
well, not
Heavier
quite the
theory,
same way, but in
often
the
summed
way
up in the phrase,
mathematically
neurons that
a
fire
pawn
together
needs to be a
wire
knight,
together.
a bishop, a knight,
Here,
a
the
rook, a
biggest
king, a
increases
queen,
to weights, the biggest
a
strengthening
pawn.
of connections
Just being
happens
E2 for right
between
now.
neurons which are the most active and the ones which we wish to become more active. In a sense,
Money,
the neurons that are firing while seeing a
C3
two get more
or
strongly
whatever,
linked to those
you
firing
know, I
when
can't,
thinking
that's,
about a two. To be clear, I really am not in a position to make statements one way or another about whether artificial networks
see
of
you from
neurons
this
behave
far.
anything
I have
like
these
biological
numbers.
brains.
I will
And
eventually
this
tell
fires
them they need
together,
to back
wire
the fuck
together
off.
idea
Here's what
comes
I
with
know
a couple
about the
meaningful
number.
asterisks.
His
But
is this
taken as a
long,
very loose analogy,
it's
I
this
do
many
find it
qubits,
interesting to note.
and this is what
Anyway,
I planned on
the
doing
third
with
way
it,
that
but
we can help increase this neuron's activation is by changing all the activations
Why?
from the previous layer. Namely, if everything connected to that digit 2 neuron with a positive weight got
Sharks
brighter,
over here, man.
and if everything connected with a negative weight got dimmer,
That's energy for you.
then that digit 2
When
neuron
I'm
will
going
become
blue
more
phase
active.
on red phase, calling you all marshmallows and mallow
similar to the
cup
weight
factories,
changes,
right?
you're going to get the
the
most
whole
bang for
leisure.
your buck by seeking changes that are proportional to the size of the corresponding weights. Now, of course, we cannot directly influence those activations. We only
But
have control over
one of
the
them
weights and biases.
IMA
But
rings.
just as with the last layer,
I want to see
it's
it in your
helpful to
damn
just keep a
pocket made
note
out of that
of what
Z coin
those
because you
desired
tap it out and
changes
figured
are.
out this coin could be
But
worth
keep in mind,
25
zooming
cents
out one
of a
step
quarter,
here,
or
this is only what that digit 2
something
output
more.
neuron wants.
Z coin on the
Remember,
press,
we also
gorilla
want all
coin,
of
I don't
the
care
other
if it's made
neurons
out
in the
of
last
gold,
layer
mine's
to
made
become
out of
less
turds.
active.
Telling you.
And each of those other output neurons
Rather than
has its own
turds,
thoughts
we'll
about
shine it
what
up a
should
little
happen
bit.
to
I
that
mean, we
second
got
to last
options.
layer.
There's not many. Yeah.
So, the desire of this digit 2 neuron is added together with the desires of all the other output neurons.
He
for
winds up
what
making
should
a
happen
lathe,
to this
right?
second to
In
last
this
layer.
3D engine over
Again,
here, this
in
thing
proportion
starts to
to the
pop off,
corresponding
going
weights,
back in time to
and
figure
in
out all the
proportion
parts
to
to put
how
it in this
much
shit.
each of those neurons
Whoever
needs
the
to
inventor
change.
was didn't have that
This
angle
right here
figured
is
out
where
on
the
the
idea
two.
of propagating backwards comes in. By adding together all these desired effects, you
Go to
basically
that.
get a list of
Go
nudges
to Penn's row
that
and
you
he's gonna hit
want
you
to
the
happen
backing
to
problem.
this second
Done.
to last
Don't
layer.
worry about it. None of it.
And
Leonard
once you
out
have
there. Hey,
those,
you
can
got to do it this
recursively
way.
apply the same
Multivariable
process to the
calculus this
relevant
way.
weights and
All right,
biases
buddy.
that
I might do it
determine
better
those
than you
values.
too, because when I
Repeating
end
the
on
same
half this
process I just
real
walked
good,
through and moving
real good.
backwards
Get out
through
here
the
with the ZBrush and beat the devil out of it.
And zooming out a bit further, remember that this is all just how a single training example wishes to nudge each one of those weights and biases.
We can go
if we only listen
day
to what
for
that
day
2
in the trend
wanted,
line.
the
We're
network
just
would
waiting
ultimately
for
be
it.
incentivized just to classify all images as a 2. So what you do is you go through this same backprop routine for every
Patterns
other
and treads
training
going to run on
example,
patterns and
recording
treads
how each
on
of them would like to
footers
change the
that
weights
are
and the biases.
this many footage
And you
inside
average
here, and I'm
together
going to
those
hit something
desired
like
changes.
this. When I'm running 2-inch or any other variable, let's say 1-inch, or let's say,
This collection
well,
here
you would start from
of
the base
average
matrix, but when
nudges
I'm
to each
running,
weight and bias is,
you wind up
loosely
making,
speaking,
this needs to
the
be a 3-ring
negative
binder,
gradient of the
for
cost function
shizzle.
referenced
No
in the
kidding
last
about
video,
what the
or at least
definition of this
something
motherfucker
proportionate
is
to it.
today.
I say loosely speaking only because I have yet to
Oh,
get
is that you?
quantitatively precise about
Sharp?
those nudges. But if you understood every change that I just referenced, why some are proportionally bigger than others, and how they all need to be added together, you understand the mechanics for what backpropagation is actually doing. By the way, in practice, it takes an extremely long time to add up the influence of every single training example every single gradient descent step. So here's what's commonly done instead. You randomly shuffle your training data and then divide it into a whole bunch
that's
of
what
mini
we know. I
batches.
just
Let's
put
say each
numbers
one
on
having
this
100
arbitrarily.
training
You know,
examples.
it's a hard thing to
Then you
do just
compute
without
each step
forming a pattern.
according to the mini
I come in a
batches.
couple of
It's
practice
not going to be
papers
the actual
before I just get
gradient
into
of
this
the
thing.
cost
Cling,
function,
cling,
which
cling, cling,
depends on
cling.
all of the training data,
What
not
is
this
it?
tiny subset.
It means something out there and
So
you just
it's
find
not
it.
the most efficient step downhill, but each mini batch does give you a pretty good approximation, and more importantly, it gives you a significant computational speed up.
Maybe.
If you were to plot the trajectory of your network under the relevant cost surface, it would be a little more like a
Energy
drunk
can
man
do that.
stumbling
Semantics,
aimlessly
by
down a hill,
definition,
but
when you
taking
read
quick
the book,
steps,
there's an internet
rather
book
than
on it.
a
I printed that
carefully
motherfucker
calculated
out. It
one
was like this
determining
thick.
the exact downhill direction of each step before taking a very
And palm
slow and
signal,
careful
hand
step
right,
in that
and on it.
direction.
How's it going, big dog?
This technique is referred to as stochastic gradient descent. There's kind of a lot going on
I
here,
guess
so
if we're
let's
gonna do
just sum
that,
it up for ourselves,
stochastics.
shall we? Backpropagation is the algorithm
Born
for
in row.
determining how a single
That's what I've
training
been running
example
for,
would like to nudge the weights and biases.
You could go Bell's
Not just in terms of
quality
whether
and
they should go
Gresham's
up or
law
down,
for field
but in terms
theory.
of what relative proportions
But
to those
nevertheless,
changes
what they were
cause the
doing.
most rapid decrease to the cost.
What they
A
were
true
doing, whether
gradient
they
descent
may
step
not
would involve
fully
doing this
understand
for
some
all
of the
your tens of
conceptual
thousands of
models in
training
neural net.
examples and averaging the desired changes that you get. But that's computationally slow. So instead, you randomly subdivide the data into these mini batches.
You're getting a
and
lot of
compute
this
each
about
step
stacks
with
on
respect to a mini batch.
organization of field
Repeatedly going
theories and
through all of the mini
positions and their
batches and making
students,
these
their
adjustments,
MP problems
you
with
will
law.
converge towards a
There's when and
local
why
minimum
this
of
thing
the cost
spiked
function,
up just being New
which is to
York's
say your network is
topology
gonna
and a
end up
blanket
doing a
you
really
gotta lay
good
down
job on
silk
the training
sheets.
examples.
Or buy.
So with all of that said, every line of code that would go into implementing backprop actually corresponds with something that you have
heard of
now seen, at least in informal terms. But sometimes
I can show
knowing
you.
what the math does is only half the
Summon
battle.
Lambda.
Just
Get,
representing
tell them
the
to
damn thing
drag
is where it
Devil
gets all
Corpse
muddled
in
and
here and
confusing.
we'll fucking get on it.
So, for those of you who do want to go deeper, the next video goes through the same ideas that were just presented here, but in terms of the
go
underlying
on.
calculus, which should hopefully make it a little more familiar as you see the topic in other
I'm off on a
resources.
little bit of a number.
Before
just
one
a
thing
little
worth
bit off
emphasizing
on
is that for
dial
this
over
algorithm to
on.
work, and this goes for all sorts of machine learning beyond just neural networks,
You tied
you
in, you
need a
shouldn't be
lot of
worried about
training
that.
data. In our case, one thing that makes handwritten digits such a nice example
Well, in the
is that
way
there
you
exists
still have to
the
apply
MNIST
direct
database with
physics.
so
You have
many
to put
examples that
pressure
have been
on
labeled by
something to let it be
humans.
known.
So a common
Bar
challenge
to
that
bar,
those of you
for the
working
most
in
part,
machine
when you
learning
do
will be
alcohol
familiar with,
testing
is just
or
getting the labeled training data
just
that you
horse
actually
training.
need, whether that's having people label tens of thousands of images,
What do you
whatever
do?
other data type you might be dealing with. And this actually transitions really nicely to today's extremely relevant sponsor, Crowdflower, which is a software platform where data scientists and machine learning teams can create
I
training
saw that
data.
once and I was like,
They
you
allow
know, you can
to
trust
upload
other
text or
because they're
audio or
master
image data
masons.
and have it annotated by real people. You may have heard of the human-in-the-loop approach before, and this is essentially what we're talking about here.
It's like all of it.
Leveraging human intelligence to train machine intelligence.
And then we assault
They employ a whole bunch of pretty smart quality control mechanisms to
surprised,
keep
this
the data
guy,
clean
sweetheart,
and accurate,
honestly.
and they've helped to
Get him in
train,
trouble
test, and
sometimes.
tune
This
thousands
one
of
should
data
get
and
with a
AI
bread
projects.
basket just because they're
And
holding a
what's most
fucking bread
fun,
basket
there's
in
actually a free
2021.
t-shirt in this for you guys.
Catch you on next one.